A late April afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A retired soldier walking his dog, a German shepherd that had once saved his life on the other side of the world. Then the cruiser slows beside him. Two officers step out. The questions aren't really questions. The badges aren't really badges. They're something older, uglier. The scent of a decision already made. The dog complies, lowers to the pavement on command. The shot fires anyway. And in that single second, as the warmth drains between his fingers, as his hands shake against fur that will never rise again, Marcus Cole hears his father's voice from 11 years ago. A voice buried in a drawer. A voice the system decided didn't matter. Except one of the officers standing over him, the one holding the smoking weapons partner, was standing on another sidewalk 11 years ago too, watching another Cole man fall, and doing nothing for 4 minutes, 17 seconds. Hobble, 2019. 2 in the morning, no moon, no wind, nothing moving in the dark except two of them, Marcus Cole and Rex. Not a man and his dog, not a handler and his animal, something closer than that. Something that had been built over 4 years of shared danger into a kind of fluency. The way two people who have worked together long enough stop needing words, because the words have been replaced by something faster, something cellular. They moved through the alley in single file. Marcus slightly behind Rex's left shoulder, the way they always moved. Huck setting the pace, Marcus trusting it, the whole column of 8 men behind them trusting both. Rex stopped, not slowed, not hesitated. Stopped, 4 paws dropping into the dirt like the earth had made a fist around him and said, "Here, right here, don't take another step." Marcus raised fist, the column went still. He didn't need to explain it. Every man behind him had worked with Rex long enough to know that when Rex stopped like that, you stopped. Full stop. No questions, no delay. 3 seconds of silence so complete he could hear his own pulse. Then the tech specialist moved up, crouched low, pressed his device against the ground 6 inches ahead of where Rex had planted. Looked up, held up 4 fingers. Then pointed straight 4 IEDs, buried in a 30-foot spread directly in their path. Enough explosive force to take out every man in that column and leave nothing worth putting in a bag. Rex had smelled them through 2 feet of packed earth and 3 days of desert wind, in darkness so total that Marcus couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. Marcus crouched beside him, put his hand on the back of Rex's neck, pushed his fingers into the thick fur, and stayed there for exactly 1 breath. Not performing gratitude, not making a moment out of it, just letting his body say the thing that didn't have words. Rex turned his head, found Marcus's face in the dark the way we always found it. Those amber eyes, darker than dark, somehow visible anyway. "Good boy," Marcus said quietly. "We're even now." Rex held his gaze for another second, then turned back to the alley ahead. Still working, still watching, always watching. Granite, gray. 1 diagonal crack across the lower left corner where a lawnmower had glanced off it years ago. Nobody had fixed it. The grass grew in neat around the edges because Marcus paid a service to keep it that way. The only maintenance he'd organized since coming home. James Cole, 1958-2013. That was all. No epitaph, no scripture, no decorative carving. Just his name and his years cut clean into the stone the way James Cole had lived, without excess, without performance, without asking the world to make more of him than he was. Marcus stood in front of it with his hands in his jacket pockets. Rex sat at his left side, completely still, ears tracking the middle distance, with the methodical patience of a dog, who understood that some moments required watching, without knowing what you were watching for. The morning was doing what April mornings do in Ohio. Cool enough that your jacket earned its keep. Warm enough that by the time the sun cleared the tree line, it had become slightly too much. The light came sideways through the oaks and made everything look suspended, underwater, like the whole world was holding something in. A cardinal called twice from somewhere in the upper branches, then went quiet. Marcus didn't move. He'd been standing here for 12 minutes. He knew without checking, because he tracked time the way some people tracked breathing, automatically, without deciding to. The habit of 14 years in environments where the wrong 12 minutes could mean something final. He hadn't said anything yet. James Cole had been a man who distrusted ceremony, who believed that showing up was the thing. Not the words you said when you got there, not the flowers you brought, not the performance of feeling, just the showing up, just the being present in the place where the person was, So Marcus showed up every few weeks and stood here and let his father's name be the only thing in the world for a little while. Rex pressed his shoulder gently against Marcus's left leg, not asking for anything, not going anywhere, just making contact the way he always did when he sensed that Marcus had gone somewhere inside himself that was harder to navigate than the outside world. Marcus exhaled slowly, looked down at Rex, then back the crack in the granite. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. 38 years old, 14 years Delta Force, 3 months retired. Those facts sounded like a sequence. They weren't. They were more like 3 separate truths that had agreed to coexist in the same body, without fully resolving with each other. The retirement had been medical in the technical sense. A knee that had absorbed 14 years of hard landings, rough terrain, full kit, and the accumulated insults of doing extraordinary physical things in environments that were hard on ordinary bodies. The orthotist had been careful, professional, not unkind. She'd shown him the imaging and walked him through what it meant, and used the word sustainable several times in ways that were clearly meant to soften the word no. Marcus had listened, asked 2 questions, signed the paperwork. Not because he was ready, because his body had decided for him, and Marcus Cole had spent enough time in situations where outcomes were determined by facts, rather than preferences that he'd learned not to argue with facts. I came back to his father's house, 2-story, nondescript siding, mailed painted peeling in 3 places on the garage door. The left porch railing loose enough that you could feel it give under your hand if you gripped it too firmly. A gutter over the kitchen window that sagged in the middle, with the resignation of something that had been neglected slightly, too long. Marcus noticed all of it the day he moved in. He hadn't fixed any of it yet, not because he lacked the ability. He was a man who could disassemble and reassemble a weapon in under 40 seconds in total darkness, who had navigated foreign terrain by starlight with no map and no margin for error, who had kept himself and others alive in circumstances that required a level of practical competence most people would find difficult to imagine. I could absolutely fix a gutter. He just needed a minute. Time to learn how to be in a place without first running a threat assessment on it. Time to stop cataloging exits in restaurants and scanning rooftops out of habit and waking up in the 3 seconds before full consciousness, wondering where he was and what the operational status was. Time to let a kitchen be just a kitchen. Rex helped. That was the only way Marcus knew how to say it. Not that Rex made it easier, exactly. Just that Rex gave the days a structure they wouldn't have had otherwise. The morning walk, the evening walk, the meals at regular intervals because Rex needed them, and Marcus needed to be needed. The specific sound of another living thing existing in the house alongside you. The soft percussion of paws on hardwood floors, the particular sigh Rex made when he settled at the foot of the bed, the way he appeared at Marcus's side every time Marcus stood in the kitchen for more than 30 seconds, hopeful and patient and completely confident that Marcus would eventually produce something worth the wait. It wasn't healing. Marcus wasn't sure he believed in the particular kind of healing that self-help books promised, but it was something. It was the ordinary kept ordinary by small daily obligation, which was more than he'd had in 14 years of extraordinary. The house had belonged to James Cole for 30 years, and before him, technically, though James Cole had bought it and considered it entirely his own, to a family named Pittman who had moved to Arizona in 1989. James Cole had been a practical man, sensible with money, uninterested in status. He'd bought the house because it was solid and the school district was decent and the backyard was big enough to throw a ball around in. Back when Marcus and Simone were small enough that throwing a ball around in a backyard was sufficient entertainment for an entire Saturday. I'd meant to fix the porch railing. Had mentioned it several times over the years. Always in the way a man who intends to get to something and believes he will have time. He hadn't had time. Marcus thought about that sometimes, not with the specific weight of tragedy. He'd been carrying the weight of his father's death for 11 years and had learned to distinguish between the grief and the thoughts that orbited the grief. Just with the ordinary recognition that time was a thing people assumed they had and then discovered they didn't. He thought about it, and then he went and made coffee. Because that's what you do. You make coffee. You take the dog out. You fix the gutter eventually, when you're ready. And you try to be the kind of person your father would recognize. The kind who keeps going even when keeping going is the hardest thing. Rex had been born at a breeding facility in Virginia in 2018. German Shepherd, black and gold, 85 pounds at full growth, with ears that stood upright like radio towers, and a nose that had been tested, documented, and confirmed as one of the most accurate explosive detection instruments his handlers had ever worked with. I'd been matched with Marcus in early 2020, after Marcus's previous partner, a Belgian Malinois named Keller, was retired due to a degenerative hip condition that progressed faster than anyone expected. Marcus had liked Keller, respected him deeply. Their working relationship had been excellent and functional and clean, in the way of two professionals who trusted each other's competence without requiring anything beyond that. Rex was immediately, unmistakably different. Rex had opinions about the order in which things should happen in the morning, about which members of the unit deserved his attention, and which ones he tolerated with polite indifference, about the precise distribution of space on any surface he shared with Marcus, which tended to disadvantage Marcus significantly. He was, in the fullest sense, a personality. And that personality, without announcement, without conscription, walked into the part of Marcus that had been sealed off since October 2013 and simply sat down there. Did not try to fix anything, did not make a project of anything, just occupied the space the way warmth occupies a cold room when someone finally gets a fire going. The second deployment together was Iraq, 2022. They were 3 days from end of rotation. A structure that was supposed to be cleared, documented, double cleared, turned out not to be. Something shifted in the building while they were inside. Not a bomb, just bad construction and old concrete and the wrong weight distribution at the wrong time. A section of the second floor came down in a way that nobody had anticipated, and that gave nobody enough time to do anything except react. Marcus went down under a slab that caught him across the lower back and right leg. Pinned, not critically, not bleeding out, not losing feeling, just immovably stuck in a corner of a collapsing structure with particulate in the air so thick that the flashlight on his vest illuminated nothing but white. He called out. Got one response from across the rubble, then nothing. The radio was damaged. He couldn't assess how damaged. Then Rex. Rex had been outside the structure when it went clear. Designated safe position, trained protocol was to hold position and await handler instruction or extraction team arrival. Rex did not hold position. Marcus heard him before he saw him. The specific sound of a dog navigating debris, the particular intelligence of the movement. Not frantic, not panicked, just purposeful in the way that Rex did everything. Following whatever signal he followed when he was tracking Marcus specifically. The signal that apparently went through concrete and dust, without losing clarity. Rex found him, and then Rex laid down. Right there, in the rubble, in the dark and the bad air, Rex lowered himself to the ground beside Marcus and put his chin on Marcus's arm and breathed. Steady, even, slow. Like he was demonstrating something, like he was saying, this is the pace. Match it. We're going to be here for a while, and we're going to be okay, and the way we're going to be okay is by breathing at this pace. 2 hours and 43 minutes. That's how long it took the extraction team to reach them. Marcus had tracked it. Not by looking at anything, just by counting. Old habit. 2 hours and 43 minutes of Rex's warmth against his side, and Rex's steady breathing in the dark, and the particular quality of being found and of not being alone in the darkness, that Marcus hadn't fully understood he needed until it was being provided. The piece of ceiling that had come down had caught Rex's left shoulder on the way in. Torn muscle, fractured something smaller. The veterinary assessment afterward was brief and honest. Full field deployment was no longer viable. Rex would heal well. He would be fine physically. But the demands of active operational work, the sustained intensity, the physical strain, those were no longer things his shoulder could reliably support. Marcus signed the adoption paperwork. The same afternoon, the assessment came back. Our officer processing it looked up from the form. Started to say something about the timeline. That there were protocols, a process, that they usually took a few weeks to. I understand, Marcus said. I'm signing it now. The officer looked at Rex, looked at Marcus, signed the countersignature. Nobody asked why. The why was sitting right there in the room, and it didn't need anyone to point at it. There's a walk Marcus takes. Not every day, most days. When the weather holds and Rex is restless, and the walls of the house start to feel like they have opinions. He goes out the back gate and turns left onto Maywood Drive and takes the long route. Miles. Maybe a little more, depending on how Rex is feeling about the park cut through. The neighborhood is quiet in the particular way of American suburbs at 3 in the afternoon. Kids not home yet. Most adults still at work. The occasional retired person visible through a front window or on a porch. Lawns either perfectly kept or slightly neglected, rarely in between. Mailboxes in a variety of colors suggesting a homeowner association policy that was aspirational rather than enforced. Marcus liked it. He liked the rhythm. He liked the absence of threat assessment, or rather the presence of threat assessment that kept returning the same result. Nothing here. Nothing here. Nothing here. Like a diagnostic that ran automatically and kept coming back clean, and gradually, over the course of 3 months, began to feel like permission to relax. I liked the way Rex moved through it. Unhurried, systematic, pausing at specific points that mattered to Rex for reasons Marcus had stopped trying to understand and started simply respecting as Rex's business. The oak tree at the corner of Crestline and 9th, something about that oak tree. Rex checked it every single day. Stood in front of it for exactly as long as he needed to stand in front of it. Then moved on. Marcus had started thinking of it as Rex's morning briefing. Whatever information that oak tree held, Rex considered it operationally relevant. April 9th was a Tuesday. Warm enough for shirt sleeves. The kind of afternoon that feels like a promise, like the weather is committing to something, like the season is finally making good on weeks of ambivalence. The light was that particular late April gold, the kind that hits things at the right angle and makes everything look like it was designed by someone who cared about composition. Rex was in a good mood. Marcus could tell by the way he carried his tail. Not high, Rex didn't do performative happiness, but slightly elevated. Interested. Engaged with the afternoon. Marcus felt something close to good himself. Not good exactly. Not the uncomplicated good of a man with nothing to carry. But something in the vicinity of it. Something that qualified as enough. He was on the back stretch of the loop, coming north up Crestline, when he noticed the car. Not because of anything dramatic. Because he noticed everything. 14 years had made that non-negotiable. The way his attention moved over his environment constantly. Processing, filing, flagging things that were slightly wrong. The cruiser was rolling too slowly. Not stopped, not parked, rolling. At a pace that matched walking speed exactly. The pace of a vehicle that had identified a destination and was taking its time approaching it. Marcus didn't change his stride. Didn't look directly at the vehicle. Let his peripheral vision work. Black and white, standard issue, 2 occupants. Driver leaning slightly forward. Ux's ear rotated back. One ear, the right one. A degree of rotation so small that nobody watching would have noticed it. Marcus noticed it. He stopped walking. Turned toward the vehicle with the deliberate, unhurried calm of a man who has nothing to hide and knows it, and intends to make that knowledge visible in every muscle of his body. The window was already down. The driver, mid to late 40s, wide through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had settled into authority the way furniture settles into old carpet, as a matter of time and weight, leaned an elbow on the frame. Easy. Too easy. The practiced ease of a man who had learned that performing relaxation projected control. Derek Voss. Marcus didn't know that name yet. He knew the face only in the way you know a type. Had seen that particular arrangement of features and posture in other contexts, in other environments, wearing different uniforms and carrying different titles. The man who expected the world to organize itself around him. The man who had been given just enough power that the expectation had calcified into certainty. His partner had already gotten out. Shane Pruitt, younger, harder around the edges, moving with an energy that read as chronically understimulated, like a man who needed incidents and had learned that his job provided them if he managed the environment correctly, had positioned himself behind Marcus and to the left. 8 feet back, not blocking, not quite crowding, just there, in the position. Afternoon, Voss said, friendly. The kind of friendly that's a hand extended palm up before you know whether it's offering something or asking for it. Afternoon, officer. Marcus kept his voice level, even. The voice of a man who has decided how this is going to go and has enough experience with how things go to make that decision stick. Something I can help you with? Just doing a check. New faces in the neighborhood. Voss tilted his head. Don't think I've seen you around here before. I travel a lot. Just got back a few weeks ago. That right, not a question. Work? Security consulting. Private sector, high-risk environments, mostly international. From behind and to the left, Pruitt made a sound. Not quite a scoff. The sound a man makes when he's decided the answer he just heard is unconvincing and wants you to know. He's decided that without actually saying so. Off Rex's right ear rotated another degree. Marcus said nothing. You live in this neighborhood? Voss asked. I do. The house at 4417 Maywood. I inherited it from my father. He gave the address before Voss could ask for it. Clear, specific, volunteered. The behavior of a man with nothing to conceal. Huh. Voss absorbed this with the expression of someone encountering a fact they'd been hoping not to encounter. Mind if I see some ID? Marcus reached into his jacket, slowly, with the particular care of a man who understood that how you moved your hands in this context was information. I produced his wallet, license, current address, matching exactly what he'd said. Voss took it. And here is the thing that Marcus would think about later. HUD return to and examine and understand. Voss looked at the license for less than 2 seconds, standard, routine. And then, in the fraction of that time between looking and looking away, something happened behind his eyes. Small, gone almost before it formed, like a word recognized before it's fully processed. Coal. The name landed on Voss's face and left a shadow. Not guilt exactly. Not recognition of Marcus specifically. Something older than that. Something that lived in a file that was supposed to be closed. Marcus caught it. Caught it and did not react to it and filed it in the part of his mind that ran underneath everything else. The part that kept building the picture from whatever pieces the environment offered, whether or not he was consciously directing it. Voss handed the license back, dismissively. Returned it the way you returned something that disappointed you. Mind if we ask a few more questions? I've been asked, Marcus said in answering. Pruitt moved closer. Rex's body remained completely still, every external indicator. Calm, controlled, on leash, no threat. But the quality of Rex's stillness had changed. The way the quality of silence changes when something enters a room, even if the room doesn't get louder. Marcus felt it, recognized it. Felt his own body want to respond to it and told his body not yet. I got a call about someone unfamiliar in the area, Voss said. People get nervous. I understand, Marcus said. I also live here. Right, you said that. Voss's tone had a particular quality, not hostile exactly. Just the smoothly maintained implication that what Marcus said and what was true might be two different things. So I said it because it's true, Marcus said. Pruitt stepped forward, not dramatically, just one step. The step of a man comfortable with the message his body sends when it moves closer to someone who hasn't asked it to. Nice dog, he said. Not like he meant it. Thank you. Yes, for what? Protection. He's a former military working dog, retired from service. He responds to commands, and he doesn't create problems unless he's given a reason to. Pruitt looked at Rex the way some people look at things that unsettle them, with aggressive disinterest, the performance of not being bothered by something that was bothering them. Might want to keep better control of him, Pruitt said. He's on a leash, Marcus said. He's sitting. He hasn't moved. I'm not sure what better control would look like to you. But that's what it looks like to me. The air changed. It was a small change. The kind of thing that would have been imperceptible to most people. But Marcus had spent 14 years reading air. Reading the pressure shifts and postures and micro-decisions that happen right before something stops being verbal and becomes something else. Voss and Pruitt exchanged something that wasn't a look exactly. More like a confirmation. The brief mutual acknowledgement of two people who had agreed on something before they arrived, and were now verifying that the agreed-upon thing was still the plan. It was. Going to need you to step over here, Voss said. Not loudly, not aggressively. The way a man says something when he's very confident it will be complied with. Why? Marcus asked. Not belligerent, genuinely asking. Because the question of why had a legal answer and a factual answer, and he was going to need to know which of those was being offered. Just a few more questions. I've answered your questions. We're not done. Marcus looked at him, steady. The look of a man who was running a calculation and had completed it. The calculation said, these men have decided how this ends. The variable is not whether it ends that way. The variable is how much of himself he gives them along the way. He gave them nothing. I'm going to remain where I am, he said, because I've done nothing wrong and I have no legal obligation to do anything else. If you have a specific charge or a specific reason to detain me, I'll hear it. Pruitt moved, not toward Marcus, toward Rex. And Rex, who had been trained for 4 years to distinguish between incidental movement and directed approach, between someone walking past and someone walking toward, shifted his weight forward onto his front paws. Not a lunge, not an attack, a shift. The physical preparation of a body that had been reading this situation correctly since the cruiser slowed down and was now responding to the thing the situation had become. Both of Voss's hands went to his belt. Control your dog, he said. Sharper now, the pleasant performance gone. Rex. Marcus said it clear and quiet. The command voice, not loud, not sharp, just the specific register Rex had been trained to respond to. Down. Rex looked at him. That look, Marcus had seen that look hundreds of times in 4 years, and he knew every variation of it. This one was the one that asked, "Are you certain?" Not defiant, not refusing. Just the double check of a dog whose instincts were telling him one thing, and whose training told him to defer to Marcus, and who wanted to make sure Marcus had all the information before he deferred. I see it too, Marcus thought back at him. I know. Down, he said again. Rex began to lower himself. Pruitt's hand came off his belt, and came back up with the weapon already drawn. Marcus had time to think exactly one thing, which was that this was wrong. Wrong procedure, wrong threshold, wrong everything, before the shot happened. The sound didn't reach him the right way. It arrived wrong, out of order. First, the jerk of the leash. First, Rex's stagger. 1 step back. 2, the way a body moves when something has gone terribly wrong inside it. First, the collapse. Then the sound. Marcus was already on his knees before he understood he'd moved. His hands found Rex in the dark that had come from nowhere. Not actual dark. The afternoon was still golden and unreasonable and completely indifferent, but the dark that descends when something happens that your mind refuses for a half-second to process. His hands found Rex, and the warmth was wrong. Too much warmth in the wrong place. Hey. The word came out of him like something being torn rather than said. Hey, I've got you. Stay with me. Rex was looking at him. Still looking. Still finding a face with those amber eyes. Finding it the way he always found it, through dark, through dust, through 2 feet of packed earth, and 3 days of wind if that's what it took. Still here. Still with him. Rex's breathing was shallow and getting shallower, and Marcus's hands were pressing the thing they were prefacing, and somewhere above him, Voss was saying something that wasn't getting through, because the only thing that was getting through was this. Father's voice. 1993, autumn, the back step of this same house. James Cole sitting beside his 7-year-old son after a day that had gone wrong in the small but pointed way that days go wrong for 7-year-olds. The world will try to make you small, son. That's just what it does. Every single day it's going to try. What do you do when it wins, Dad? A pause. His father looking out at the yard. The particular patience of a man who doesn't answer quickly because he means what he says. I'll get back up. That's all there is. You just get back up. Rex took one more breath, and then the quality of the weight in Marcus's arms changed. Not dramatically, not like the movies. Just a settling. A small, total, irreversible settling, the way a thing relaxes when it is no longer trying to do anything. Marcus stayed where he was. His hands didn't move. Afternoon continued. A car passed on the cross street. Someone's sprinkler system kicked on 2 houses down. The cardinal in the cemetery oak had its counterpart here. Something small and persistent calling from a tree Marcus couldn't see. The world completely indifferent to the fact that Rex was gone. He lifted his head. Pruitt still had the weapon out. His face had settled into an expression that was trying to be professional and landing somewhere between satisfaction and uncertainty. The face of a man who had done what he expected to do and was now slightly unsure of what to do next. Voss had his hands on his belt. His expression was the closed door of a man who had already decided what the narrative was going to be. Marcus stood up. What came out of him wasn't planned. Tactical. Wasn't the careful, controlled response of a trained operative managing a situation. It was just the sound that lives in a person for decades and comes out when the thing that was holding it in is gone. Ha moved toward them. Pruitt tased him. The current took every muscle Marcus had and made all of them useless at once. He went down hard on the pavement. His body was not his anymore. It belonged to whatever the voltage was doing, and what it was doing was not negotiable. Then the hands, the cuffs, the knee between his shoulder blades. Marcus stopped fighting, not because the rage was gone. The rage was enormous. The grief was enormous. Both of them, together, were the largest thing he had ever contained. And he was containing them by force of will alone, in the way of a man who knows that letting them out right now will cost him everything he needs to have left. He put his wrists together. He looked at Rex and made a promise that didn't need words because it was addressed to the part of him that was already well past words. The holding cell smelled like industrial solvent and old upholstery, and the specific exhaustion of a room that had held too many people who didn't deserve to be there. The bench was cold. The light was fluorescent and committed. Marcus sat with his back against the wall, forearms resting on his knees. Hux's blood had dried under his fingernails, in the particular way of things you can't unfeel once you've noticed them. He was not panicking. Panic was for situations you hadn't seen coming. He had seen this coming, not this specifically, not Rex, not Tadede, but the shape of this. The shape of what it looked like when the world decided it was done accommodating you. He was thinking about the fraction of a second when Voss looked at his license. The way the name had landed, the shadow it had left. Cole Voss had been there. October 14, 2013. Officer D. Voss, present at scene. He'd read that line so many times in the copy of the incident report that the page was soft at the edges from handling. I'd seen it as a fact before, a name on a list. An officer among several. Now he was seeing it differently. The door opened, heels. Fast and purposeful, in the specific way of someone who had been moving at that speed since the moment their phone rang and had not once considered slowing down. Simone Cole walked in like weather coming through a window somebody had accidentally left open. 34 years old, natural hair pulled back with the efficiency of a woman who dressed for outcomes, not impressions. Blazer that said she had been in a meeting when Marcus's name came through and had left it without finishing her sentence. The face she wore when she was doing the work of converting fear for someone she loved into something sharper and more useful. Because fear didn't win cases. She looked at Marcus. He looked at her, the blood on his hands. For half a second, just half a second, Simone Cole was not a lawyer. She was just his little sister, who had been 11 years old when Marcus left for Kandahar the first time, and 23 when their father died, and who had been, through all of it, the person who showed up, who organized things, who made calls and filed papers and sat in waiting rooms and did the 10,000 practical things that grief requires, while also being in the grip of the grief. Then she put it away, turned to the officer at the door, extended the paperwork without looking at him. You're releasing him. Tonight. Without charges. Because what you're holding him on isn't an arrest, it's a liability. If you'd like to discuss why, I can have that conversation in front of a judge tomorrow morning at 8. The officer left. Simone came and sat beside Marcus. Not across from him, beside him. The way she'd always sat beside him, the specific geometry of a sibling who had decided somewhere in childhood. That beside was the correct position. She looked at his hands. He watched her look at them. Marcus, she said finally. I know, you need to let me, I know, Simone. She looked at him for a long time, reading him the way she'd been reading him their entire lives, knowing that he was always more than what he showed in that. The gap between what he showed and what was there was usually the most important part. She saw what was in the gap. She recognized it. I'm not going to say don't, she said quietly. Good. I'm saying be smart. I know how to be smart. Be smarter than you think you need to be. He met her eyes, held them. Okay, smoothed her blazer, walked to the door and turned back once with a look that meant, I see you. I'm here. Don't make me identify you somewhere worse than this. Then she left to handle the paperwork, and Marcus sat in the cold light of the holding cell, looking at his father's dried blood on his hands. No, Rex's blood. Rex's blood on his hands, and his father's name on a page in a drawer, and the same name on a list of officers, and the same shadow on a man's face when he read a license, and let the full shape of it come together. He did not yet know what he was going to do. He knew it was going to be exact. He knew it was going to take everything he had. And he knew that when it was over, it was going to be over completely, in a way that could not be undone or buried or signed into a drawer, by the hand of a man who had decided that some lives had less value than his comfort. He sat with that knowledge. Let it settle. Let it become, from the enormous burning thing it currently was, something cold and functional. The transformation took about 20 minutes. By the time Simone came back with the release papers, Marcus Cole was ready. 7 days. That was how long the internal investigation took. 7 days to review the incident report. 7 days to examine whatever body cam footage existed, which turned out to be limited because Pruitt's camera had malfunctioned, and Voss's had been angled at the ground for the portion of the encounter that mattered most. 7 days to talk to whatever witnesses they talked to, and write whatever they wrote, and file it in whatever system it was going to live in. 7 days. Marcus spent them working. Not the kind of working that looks like working from the outside. From the outside, someone watching him through the kitchen window would have seen a man sitting at his father's table with a laptop and a legal pad and a coffee that went cold faster than he drank it. They would have seen him writing things down, crossing things out, opening browser windows, making occasional notes in a handwriting so small it was almost shorthand. They would not have seen what was actually happening, which was the same thing that happened when Marcus sat in a briefing room before a complex operation. The slow, methodical construction of a complete picture from incomplete pieces. The patient work of a man who understood that what you didn't know was just as important as what you did, and that the shape of the gap told you as much as the information filling it. He started with what he had, Derek Voss. He ran the name through everything accessible to us, a civilian, with the right technical background and the right contacts. Public records, court documents, department press releases going back 12 years. 3 different databases that were technically private but practically available to anyone who knew how to ask. What emerged was not a portrait of a corrupt officer. It was something more dangerous than that. It was the portrait of a man who had learned, very early in his career, that the distance between what he was allowed to do and what he could get away with was larger than anyone officially admitted, and who had spent 15 years systematically exploring that distance. 17 misconduct complaints, every single one dismissed, not resolved. Dismissed. The language of each dismissal was different on the surface and identical underneath. Insufficient evidence, unable to substantiate inconsistent witness accounts. Officer acted within departmental guidelines. The specific bureaucratic vocabulary of a system declining to look at itself. Shane Pruitt, younger, less sophisticated in his corruption, which made him more dangerous in some ways and more visible in others. 8 complaints in 6 years. Same pattern of dismissal. 2 of those complaints had made it further than the others, had reached a review stage, had been assigned a case number, had seemed for a brief period like they might become something, before quietly disappearing. The dates of those disappearances corresponded, in both cases, to a memo from the office of the precinct captain, authorizing a procedural review of the complaints process. A memo that resulted in a restructured process, a process that made it substantially harder for complaints to advance. The precinct captain who had signed that memo, Warren Doyle. Marcus sat with that name for a long time. Then he started pulling on the thread. Warren Doyle, 54, 26 years in the department. Career that looked, on the departmental record, like steady competent service, rising through appropriate channels at appropriate intervals. Detective in year 7, a lieutenant in year 14, captain in year 20. The kind of career that doesn't make news because it's not designed to make news. It's designed to accumulate. What Doyle had accumulated: authority over the complaints review process, authority over personnel decisions, authority over which incidents got flagged for external review and which ones got handled internally. Authority, in practical terms, of a man who understood how the machinery worked and had positioned himself at the points where it could be redirected without leaving marks. Marcus found his signature on the closure documents for 14 of Voss's 17 complaints. Found it on the 2 Pruitt complaints that had disappeared after the procedural review. Found it on 3 other incident files. Different officers, different victims, that had resolved with department settlements paid out of a general fund in amounts small enough to avoid public attention. 14 signatures. The bureaucratic fingerprints of a man who had decided long ago that his role in this system was to make sure the system protected the people it was supposed to protect from scrutiny. And then Marcus pulled the thread further. October 14, 2013. He already knew that Voss had been present. He had known that since the night Rex died, since the kitchen table and the manila envelope, and the list of officers that ended with that name. But knowing Voss had been there, and understanding what Voss's presence meant were two different things, and Marcus had spent 11 years knowing without understanding, because there had been nothing to do with the understanding. Now he dug. The incident report for his father's death had been filed by two officers. Voss, then a 4-year veteran, and a woman named Carlissa Sims who transferred to a different district in 2015, and whose name appeared nowhere in Doyle's compliance, which suggested she had either been uninvolved in what Doyle was managing or had been smart enough to stay far from it. 3 other names appeared in the supplementary documentation. Witnesses who had been interviewed. Their statements were brief and oddly uniform in their vagueness. All 3 described hearing something, turning to look, and seeing officers at the scene. None of them described what had happened in the 4 minutes before an M1 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Simone had gotten that figure in 2015 through a source she'd never fully explained. Marcus had carried it for 9 years as a number, as an abstraction of time. Now he was trying to understand it as a decision. Because 4 minutes and 17 seconds was not an oversight. A person could fumble with a radio for 30 seconds, could assess a situation for 60, could, under extreme stress and confusion, lose track of 90. But 4 minutes and 17 seconds was something else. 4 minutes and 17 seconds was a man watching something happen and choosing, deliberately and repeatedly over the course of more than 4 minutes, to let it continue. Marcus was still at the table when the phone rang. Simone he knew before he answered. They closed it, she said. No preamble. She knew him well enough to know he didn't need softening. Justified force, she said. No disciplinary action. They're classifying Rex as a threat response. The language in the report. Her voice did something careful. It's been written to make it look like Rex charged them. Marcus, the body cam footage doesn't show that. I've seen the footage. It doesn't show. I know what happened, he said. Silence. I know what happened, he said again. It doesn't matter what the report says. It matters for what comes next. If we're going to pursue this legally, the report is the foundation they're going to build on, and we need to. Simone. She stopped. He let the silence sit for a moment. Not to be difficult, because what he was about to say required her to hear it clearly, and he needed the silence to give it room. Thank you for fighting for this, he said. I need you to know I see that. I need you to keep doing your part. But I'm going to do mine. Marcus. Not asking for permission. A longer silence. He could hear her breathing. Could hear the specific quality of her restraint. The effort of a woman who understood what was coming and had decided she was not going to try to stop it because she also understood it was not stoppable. Be smart, she said finally. I know how. Be smarter than that. Okay, she hung up. Marcus looked at the legal pad in front of him. Odds from 7 days of building a picture. The names and dates and patterns, and the 14 signatures of a man named Warren Doyle. I picked up the pen, turned to a clean page, and began. She came on a Thursday morning. Marcus heard the knock and knew before he got to the door that it wasn't Simone. Simone knocked 3 times, fast, with the impatience of a woman who had been announcing herself at this door since she was 7 years old, and saw no reason to adjust her approach. This was 2 knocks, measured. The knock of someone who had thought about whether to knock, decided yes, but left the door the option of not answering. I opened it. The woman on the porch was around 35, close-cropped natural hair, canvas jacket with the excess pockets of someone who needed to carry things and didn't want to think about where things were. Messenger bag over one shoulder. The particular alert still as of a person who processed information faster than most people talked and had learned to occupy the gap between receiving and responding with something that looked like patience. She looked at him, he looked at her. Nadia Reeves, she said, investigative journalist, independent. I know who you are. He'd come across her byline twice in the past week, both times on pieces about departmental misconduct patterns in cities outside this one. The work was good, patient, built from documents rather than sources, which was harder and more durable. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, recalibration. Then you know I've been working this story for 2 years, she said. I know you've been working Voss and Pruitt for 2 years, he said. I don't know everything you have. I'll tell you everything I have, she said. Because what I have is almost enough. And what I'm missing, I think you have it. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, not inviting her in, not closing the door. The position of a man reserving judgment. What are you missing? Context for Warren Doyle. She said it straight, without building to it. I have 2 years of documented pattern. I have his signatures on closure documents. I have the procedural memo and the dates of the disappearing complaints. What I don't have is the through line. The reason a captain with 26 years of service decided at some point in his career to make himself the specific person who protected these 2 specific officers. She paused. I think that through line runs through your father. The air on the porch changed. Marcus looked at her. She didn't look away. I have footage, she said. Security camera, October 2013. The block where your father died. She reached into her bag, produced a small USB drive, set it on the porch railing between them. I haven't published it. I won't publish it without your knowledge. But I want you to see it, and I want you to understand what it shows, because what it shows changes the nature of this story, from an officer misconduct case into something that the department is not going to be able to manage, with a procedural memo and 14 signatures. Marcus looked at the drive, looked at her. Why come to me? He said. If you have what you're saying you have, you can publish it independently. Because publication isn't enough, she said. I've published things that should have changed outcomes and didn't. The footage shows presence. It shows a man in uniform at a scene. What it doesn't show, what a jury needs in order to return the verdict this deserves, is someone willing to stand up in a courtroom and provide the context that makes presence into accountability. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to do anything you haven't already decided to do. I'm asking you to let me help you do it in a way that sticks. She stepped back from the porch. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Think about it. She turned. Marcus picked up the USB drive. Ms. Reeves. She stopped. How long have you had the footage? She turned back. 14 months. Why now? A pause. The honest kind. Because you're the first person connected to this case who I believe can actually use it. She said it without apology. Everyone else I approached either couldn't protect themselves legally or had already been ground down enough that they couldn't sustain what comes after. You're different, she left. Marcus stood on the porch with the USB drive in his hand for a moment. Went inside, put the drive in the drawer under the legal pad. Not yet. He wasn't ready to look at it yet. He understood about information, about the state you needed to be in to receive certain kinds of information without it destabilizing the thing you were building. Whatever was on that drive was going to change something in him. He needed to build the rest of the structure first. He spent the next 4 days on Voss. Not because Voss was the most important target. Marcus understood by now that Voss was the instrument and Doyle was the hand. But Voss was where Marcus needed to start, for reasons that were operational and also personal, in a way he didn't examine too closely, because examining it would have required him to make decisions about it. He watched Voss the way he had watched targets in environments where watching was the whole job. Patiently, systematically, from positions that gave him lines without giving Voss anything to see. But he learned. Voss drank at a place called Callahan's, 3 nights out of 7 on average, arriving between 9 and 9:30 and leaving between 11:30 and midnight. He drank whiskey. He got louder as the evening progressed in the specific way of a man becoming more himself rather than less. The volume of his real character increasing as the performance of his professional character decreased. He parked in the alley behind the bar because it was closer, and because 15 years of operating without consequence had made him incurious about cameras. Marcus confirmed the camera situation on day 2. Walked the alley at 3 different times, different lighting conditions, different angles. The single exterior camera on the bar's back wall was positioned to cover the emergency exit, not the parking area. The building across the alley had no exterior cameras at all. The nearest streetlight was at the far end, pointing away. The alley was effectively private. On the 5th night, Marcus was already there when Voss came through the back door. He let Voss walk 12 steps into the alley. Let him get to the point where the bar door had swung shut behind him, and the street light at the far end was ahead of him. and the darkness of the middle stretch was around him. Then Marcus stepped out of the shadow beside the dumpster. Voss didn't see him until they were 3 feet apart. What happened next was fast and precise, and designed to be exactly as painful as it needed to be, and not more. Marcus had calculated it the way he calculated everything operational, with the understanding that excess was inefficiency, that the point was not punishment, but demonstration. Voss went down. Marcus crouched beside him, unhurried. The posture of a man who had decided this conversation was going to happen at whatever pace he chose. October 14th, 2013, Marcus said, quiet. The volume of a man who knew the alley was empty and didn't need to project. Belmar Street. A man in a dark flannel shirt walking home. Voss's breathing was ragged. His hands were on the pavement, trying to find purchase that wasn't there. Flannel shirt, Marcus said again. Pocket on the left side. He'd had it since the late 90s. Bought it at a hardware store that's been a smoothie place for 6 years now. Something happened in Voss's body, not the continued reflex of pain. Something underneath that. Something that had been stored somewhere it wasn't supposed to be reachable and had just been reached. He knew. He knew exactly what Marcus was describing, and the knowing was visible in the way his body contracted, not against the physical pain, which was real and substantial, but against something older that the physical pain had unlocked. Marcus stood up. That's all I needed, he said. He walked out the far end of the alley and didn't look back. Behind him, Voss lay on the pavement in the dark and understood, for the first time since October 2013, that some things don't stay buried just because you put them there. Marcus spent 3 days preparing the house. Not dramatically. Nothing that would register as staged to someone doing a sweep. Everything placed with the specific subtlety of a man who understood that the most effective environments were the ones that looked unconstructed. That told a story so naturally that the people in the story didn't realize they were in one. The bourbon on the coffee table, half full, slightly dusty. The story, a man grieving, drinking too much, not keeping up with the small domestic things that announce a person is managing their life. A man who had been knocked down and was still deciding whether to get up. The duffel bag near the front door, open, partially packed. The story, a man thinking about leaving, maybe planning to. Not committed yet, but considering. The kitchen window, left slightly unlatched. Not open, just not fully secured. The invitation of a house that had stopped paying close attention to itself. And the cameras. 4 of them. Each one hidden in the specific way that is not actually hiding. Not concealed behind panels or inside furniture, but placed in the locations that no one thinks to check, because no one thinks anyone would put a camera there. The gap between the encyclopedia spines on the bookshelf, where the lens of the smallest camera Marcus had been able to source fit between Britannica volumes N and O. The smoke detector near the ceiling that had been James Cole's original installation and that Marcus had opened, removed the battery, and repurposed. The ceramic lamp his father had bought at a garage sale in 2007 that had a hollow base and an angle on the room that covered the front third of the living area. And the 4th one, the most important one, in the pothos plant on the windowsill. The plant Simone had brought 3 weeks ago, because she'd said the house needed something living in it. She hadn't been wrong. She also hadn't known that the small device nestled in the soil near the base of the largest stems would turn out to be the most consequential thing in the room. Audio pickup on that one was excellent. He'd tested it. Marcus also placed the microphone, separate from the cameras, attached to the underside of the coffee table where the bourbon sat. Small enough to be invisible to anyone not looking for it specifically. Sensitive enough to clearly capture conversation at normal volume from anywhere in the room. I tested everything twice. Then he settled in and waited. Not the active waiting of someone anticipating an event, the patient waiting of a man who had identified the most probable next move in a sequence and had positioned himself accordingly, and now simply needed the sequence to continue at its own pace. Voss and Pruitt were afraid. He'd made sure of that. Fear did predictable things to men who weren't accustomed to it. It made them reactive. It made them aggressive in the specific way of a man trying to reestablish control by demonstrating it. It made them come for the thing that had threatened them. They were going to come here. It was Thursday night when they did. 11:41 p.m. Marcus knew the time precisely because he had been tracking it. He was sitting in the living room, with a book open on his lap when he heard the kitchen window. The specific sound of a latch giving way. Then footsteps, 2 sets, moving with the practiced ease of men who had done this kind of thing before, and had never once faced a consequence for it. He let his face do the work. When they came through the living room doorway, Marcus looked up with the tired, slightly unfocused expression of a man who has had a few drinks and was not expecting company. Voss looked worse than he had in the alley. Moved differently. Not physically, the bruising was there but covered. But in the way a man carries himself when the certainty that had been holding him upright has developed a crack. There was something working behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something effortful. Pruitt was hardened in the way men harden when they're scared and don't want to show it. Jaw forward, shoulders up. The posture of aggression adopted as a substitute for the confidence that had been shaken. Voss, Marcus said, like a man reading a situation he wasn't sure he was reading correctly. Didn't want to knock, Voss said, moving into the room. Hands loose but positioned. Figured you might not answer. I might not have. Smart. Voss looked around the room. The bourbon, the duffel, the open, slightly untended quality of everything. Reading the story Marcus had laid out for him and finding it convincing. You've been busy. I've been home, Marcus said. That's all. That's not all. Voss took another step forward. You went to the alley. I don't know what alley you mean. Pruitt moved to Marcus's left, the same position as Crestline Avenue. The choreography so practiced it was automatic. You've been making noise, Voss said. People talk. Word gets back. I've been on my property, Marcus said. I've been going for walks. Whatever you think I've been doing. Pruitt hit him. Not a sucker punch. Marcus saw it coming in plenty of time to do any number of things that would have made the punch not land. He let it land. Absorbed it with the specific performance of a man who hadn't seen it coming. The stagger. The catching himself on the side table. The sound of impact that the audio equipment under the coffee table would pick up clearly. The bourbon bottle tipped, didn't fall. Marcus caught it, set it back. Good, the cameras had that. Voss moved in, grabbed the front of Marcus's shirt, yanked him up close enough that the audio equipment would have no difficulty. You think this is a game? Voss said, low. The intimacy of a man who wanted his words felt, not just heard. I think you broke into my house, Marcus said. I think you should be more worried about what comes next. Pruitt hit him again, ribs this time. Marcus let himself fold slightly, gave them the reaction they were looking for, the sharp exhale, the hand going to his side. He needed them confident. He needed them to feel like they were winning, because winning men get comfortable, and comfortable say things they don't plan to say. Voss leaned in closer, the bourbon on his breath, the specific recklessness of a man who had walked into someone's house without a warrant and put his hands on them, and was now running on the fuel of his own impunity, which was the most dangerous fuel there was because it had no regulator. You know what's funny about guys like you? Voss said, close enough that Marcus could see the texture of his confidence cracking around the edges. You think because you've done things, been places, that makes you different. That makes the rules different. Doesn't it? Marcus said. No, Voss shook him once. Doesn't matter where you've been, doesn't matter what your file says. You come back here, you walk these streets, you start causing problems. You're the same as everybody else who came before you and thought they could push back. He leaned in, and then he said it. Not shouted, not performed. Just said it. The way a man says something he's said before, something that lives in him, something he has allowed himself to believe is simply true. Just like your old man, Voss said. Didn't know when to stay down. Marcus went completely still. Not the stillness of shock. The stillness of completion. Because that sentence, spoken at that volume, at that proximity, in that room, had just been picked up by the microphone under the coffee table, and the camera in the lamp, and the camera in the smoke detector, and then the camera in the gap between the encyclopedia spines. On Voss's own voice, in Marcus's own house, where Voss had arrived without a warrant and without cause, and had assaulted a resident and was now, without knowing it, speaking into a recording that was going to be played in a courtroom in front of 12 people who would hear it and understand exactly what it meant. Voss had just connected himself to October 2013, on tape. Marcus looked at him, said nothing. Voss shoved him back against the wall, stepped back, looked at Pruitt with the expression of a man who was satisfied with how this had gone. Stay out of our way, Voss said. Last time we say it nice, they left the way they came. Kitchen window, alley gone. Marcus sit against the wall for 30 seconds. Then he walked to the bookshelf and pressed the button on the side of the encyclopedia that had nothing to do with encyclopedias. The recording stopped. He exhaled, sat down on the couch, looked at the bourbon on the table, didn't touch it. The Meridian Casino was 40 minutes from Marcus's house on a clear night. He'd chosen it for specific reasons that had nothing to do with gambling. It was large enough that being memorable there required actual effort. The floor staff saw hundreds of pieces per shift fought and retained the ones that gave them something to retain. I had good camera coverage, which was standard for a casino, which meant any footage pulled from it would be clear and time-stamped and unambiguous. And it had a bar staffed by people who were paid to remember faces, because remembering faces was part of the job. Marcus arrived at 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. He was unhurried, nodded at the door staff, made eye contact with the host who directed him toward the bar, mentioned, in the natural way of someone making small talk, that he'd hit some traffic on the interstate and had been looking forward to a quiet evening. The bartender's name was Francis, 50-something. The efficient warmth of someone who had been doing this long enough that being good at it had become indistinguishable from being it. Marcus ordered a club soda. When she asked if he was sure he didn't want something stronger, he smiled and said he was pacing himself. She laughed. He ordered peanuts. They talked about the drive-in. She mentioned her daughter's nursing school graduation in 6 weeks. He said that was something to be proud of, and meant it. She would remember him. He played 2 hands of blackjack at a table near the center of the floor, chatted briefly with the dealer, a young man named Carlos, who told Marcus he was saving for a car. Marcus lost both hands and said something self-deprecating about it that made Carlos laugh. Carlos would remember him. At 11 p.m. He moved back to the bar, ordered a second club soda, sat in a spot that put him in the frame of 2 different ceiling cameras simultaneously, which was a coincidence he had very carefully engineered. At 11:23, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. 1 message, 2 words, it's done. He put the phone away, ordered a third club soda. Frances appeared with it before he had to ask. Set it down with a look that said she'd been watching him nurse 2 drinks for 2 hours, and had arrived at conclusions about what kind of night he was having. You okay, hon? She said. The frankness of someone who had decided he merited it. Marcus considered the question. Getting there, he said, honestly. She nodded like that was the right answer, moved down the bar to someone who needed her more urgently. Marcus sat there for another 40 minutes, made sure 3 more members of the floor staff saw his face, left at 12:07 with a nod to the door staff, who nodded back. He drove home at the speed limit. The city was quiet, the late-night quiet of streets that have given up on purpose and are just existing now, holding the last of the day's heat in their pavement, waiting for morning. Marcus turned onto his street and saw the lights before he'd reached his driveway. 2 cruisers, 4 officers, one of them already moving toward his headlights as he pulled in. He'd expected 1 cruiser. 2 was thorough. He parked, turned off the engine, opened the door with the measured movements of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and wanted everyone present to be able to say later that he had been completely cooperative from the moment of contact. Marcus Cole, one of the officers said. A statement, not a question. That's right. The officer went through it. Rights, charges, assault. The specific language of it, Pruitt's name mentioned. Marcus listened to all of it and kept his face arranged into something that communicated neither guilt nor the specific kind of calm that reads as suspicious. I've been at the Meridian Casino since 9:15 tonight, Marcus said. I can give you the names of at least 4 staff members who spoke with me. I was there until midnight. The officer paused. You'll want to check that, Marcus said. Not helpfully, just factually. They cuffed him anyway. He let them, turned around and put his wrists together behind his back when they asked, and didn't make it anything more complicated than that. The drive to the station was quiet. He sat in the back of the cruiser and watched the city ghosts through the window and thought about Doyle. Because Doyle was what came next. Not Voss, not Pruitt. They were instruments. They were the visible part. Doyle was the architecture. And the architecture was what made all of this possible. Not just Voss and Pruitt's specific crimes, but the broader pattern. the systemic indifference, the mechanism by which men who did what Voss and Pruitt did kept doing it for 15 years without consequence. Doyle was the reason 17 complaints dissolved. Doyle was the reason Marcus's father's death had been filed and closed and left to sit in a drawer for 11 years, without anyone making the call that should have been made. On Doyle, Marcus was now fairly certain had been there. He hadn't opened the USB drive yet, but Nadia Reeves had said, "Footage, October 2013, the block where your father died." She had said, "Context for Warren Doyle." She had said it changes the nature of this story. Marcus had spent enough time building pictures from fragments to know what that meant. He was saving it. When the time came, he would look at it, and what he found there would determine what came next. For now, he had other things to do, like being very publicly arrested. The station was tense in the way of a place that has received information and hasn't finished processing it. Officers at desks looked up as Marcus was walked through. Some curious, some carefully neutral. One, a woman near the back, maybe 40, whom Marcus filed away because she looked at him with something that was neither hostility nor indifference, actually held at his gaze for a full second before looking back at her screen. He was taken to an interrogation room. Small, the table scratched from years of use, the chair bolted to the floor. The overhead light designed by someone who understood that fluorescence was its own kind of pressure. He waited. 15 minutes. Then the door opened and Captain Warren Doyle walked in. Marcus had built a picture of Doyle from documents and signatures, and the shadow his decisions cast across 15 years of other people's lives. The actual man was accurate to the picture. 54. Controlled in the way of someone who had made a practice of control until it became indistinguishable from composure. The face of a man who had been the adult in every room he'd entered for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. He sat down, set a folder on the table, didn't open it. "You know why you're here," Doyle said. "I know why you brought me here," Marcus said. "That's not the same thing." Doyle looked at him, the assessment of a man running calculations behind his eyes. "You were at the Meridian Casino tonight," Doyle said. "I was. For how long?" "From 9:15 until midnight. I can provide specific names, staff members who will confirm it." Doyle absorbed this without any visible reaction, which was itself a reaction. "Shane Pruitt was assaulted tonight," Doyle said. "Behind a bar on Clement Street, 11:45 p.m. "That's unfortunate," Marcus said. "It's also the second assault on one of my officers in the past 2 weeks." "I heard about the first one," Marcus said. "I don't know anything about either of them." Doyle opened the folder, slid a photograph across the table, security camera still, time-stamped, showing Marcus at the casino bar. 9:47 p.m. "This is you," Doyle said. "Yes, at the casino, yes. While one of my officers was being hospitalized." "Apparently." Doyle sat back. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening, re-angling. The movement of a chess player changing strategies in real time. "I'm going to ask you a direct question," Doyle said. "Go ahead. Are you responsible for what happened to Voss and Pruitt?" Marcus looked at him, held the look for exactly the amount of time that communicated. "I'm not afraid of you or your question." "No," he said. Doyle looked at him for a long time. "Then you're going to be released tonight. The alibi checks out. We've already called the casino. But I want you to understand something." He leaned forward slightly. "Whatever you think you're doing, whatever you think this leads to, there are limits to what individuals can accomplish against institutional process." "Is that a threat?" Marcus said. "It's a fact," Doyle said. Marcus looked at him, at the careful authority of his face, at the 26 years of accumulated power sitting in his posture. "I've spent 14 years working with facts," Marcus said. "I find them more reliable than most things." Doyle stood, picked up his folder. At the door he paused, turned back. "I'm sorry about your dog," he said. Marcus said nothing. Because there was nothing to say to a man who used condolence as a negotiating move. "You didn't respond to that. You filed it. You let it confirm what you already knew about the man you were dealing with." Doyle left. 40 minutes later, Marcus walked out of the station into the night air with his wrists free, and the K6 Voss and Pruitt already building in a server Nadia Reeves was managing from an apartment across town. Doyle called Simone on a Sunday. She told Marcus how that evening, sitting at his kitchen table, not the same table where Marcus had spent the first 7 days building his picture, the same room, the same light, the specific domestic ordinary of his father's kitchen that Marcus had stopped apologizing for needing. Simone had her hands around a tea she wasn't drinking. Her expression was the expression of someone who has encountered something unexpected and is still running it through her system. "He wants a deal," she said. Marcus said nothing. Full cooperation with prosecution of Vaughn Pruitt. No interference from his office. In exchange, she paused. The precise pause of a lawyer choosing words. He wants his name out of the James Cole file. Both the original incident report and anything I might be building toward. Marcus looked at his sister. She looked back. "He framed it as protecting you," she said. "Said he has enough influence to make sure any countercharges or complications disappear. Said it was the cleanest path for everyone." "He called the lawyer of the man he's trying to negotiate with," Marcus said. "He did, on your work line. He didn't ask if I was recording. He assumed you wouldn't be." Simone said nothing. The look on her face said everything the words didn't need to say. Marcus exhaled. "He's been doing this for 26 years, he said. Calling the right people, saying the right things, positioning himself as the adult who makes problems manageable. He's so confident in that move that he made it without checking whether it was safe." "Which tells you something," Simone said. "Tells me he's scared," Marcus said. "Scared people make the moves that have worked before without asking whether this situation is different." He looked at the table. "Send me the recording." She slid her phone across. He listened to it once, all the way through. His voice, smooth, reasonable, carrying the specific register of a man accustomed to being the most measured person in any room. The language of reasonableness deployed in service of something that was not reasonable. When it was done, Marcus handed the phone back. He stood up, walked to the drawer, opened it, took out the USB drive that had been sitting there since Nadia Reeves left it on his porch railing. He carried it to the laptop on the table, sat down, looked at it for a moment, then plugged it in. The folder was labeled simply, Oct 2013. Inside, 2 video files, a separate subfolder containing what turned out to be 43 pages of documentation. Nadia's 2 years of analysis, laid out with the specific thoroughness of someone who had understood that what she had was only as useful as the argument she built around it. He opened the first video file. The quality was what you expected from 2013 exterior security cameras. Grayscale, slightly granular. The toss timestamp burned into the lower right corner in the digital font of a system that prioritized function over aesthetics. The angle came from above and to the right of the intersection, positioned on the exterior wall of what had been a dry cleaning establishment. He could see the corner of Delmar and 5th. He could see a man walking, dark shirt. The flannel would have been visible in color. Marcus knew it was dark blue because he had a photograph of his father from that same month wearing that same shirt, standing in this same kitchen, smiling at whoever was behind the camera. Simone, probably. Simone had always been the one who thought to take photographs. He watched his father walk along the sidewalk, watched the patrol car pull up, watched the exchange. Brief, he'd always known it had been brief. And then the sequence that the incident report described as an altercation, and that the 3 witness statements described vaguely, and that no one had ever described clearly, because clarity was not in anyone's institutional interest. Then the second video file, different angle, lower, a camera from the building on the opposite corner, angled to cover the building's entrances and inadvertently capturing a wider swath of the intersection. On this clip, you could see the aftermath. You could see James Cole on the ground, and you could see a man in uniform, standing at the far edge of the frame, near the patrol car, not crouching, not moving toward the man on the ground, not reaching for his radio, just standing. The posture of a man watching something and having already decided what he was watching and what the appropriate response to it was. The timestamp ran. Marcus counted. 1 minute. The man in uniform had not moved. 2 minutes. 3. 4 minutes and 11 seconds into the clip, when the time visible on the timestamp was 4 minutes and 17 seconds, James Cole had gone down. The man in uniform finally reached for his radio. Hadia's documentation was thorough. Height measured against the known height of the patrol car in the frame. Cross-referenced with department records. Gait analysis. The specific way the man stood. Weight distribution. The angle of his shoulders in uniform. matched against available reference footage from 3 different department public appearances. The vehicle visible in the lower right corner of the frame. Registration cross-referenced with department fleet records for that date. Warren Doyle, a lieutenant, standing 30 feet from James Cole, choosing, not once, over the course of 4 minutes and 11 seconds, choosing repeatedly not to act. Each passing minute another choice, another decision. The accumulated weight of a man deciding, for longer than most people can hold their breath, that the man on the ground was not worth the trouble of the call. Marcus closed the laptop, sat at his father's table, in the kitchen of his father's house in the city where his father had died, with his father's Seiko watch on his wrist and the sound of the clock on the wall marking the same seconds it had always marked. He sat there for a long time, not with rage. The rage had passed through him. During the watching, probably, though he'd held himself still enough that it hadn't been visible even to him. What was left was something different. Cleaner. The specific clarity of a man who has finally seen the complete picture and understands every piece of it and knows exactly what to do. Opened the laptop again, opened his email, began to write. The first message went to Nadia Reeves. I've seen the footage. I'm ready. Tell me what you need. The second message went to Simone. Call Kathleen Marsh. Tell her we have everything. The third message, and this one took him the longest, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to say it right, went to the Civil Rights Division of the State Attorney General's office, where a woman named Patricia Vega had been building a case against the department's complaint suppression practices for 3 years, and had been publicly quoted as saying she was waiting for the right catalyst. My name is Marcus Cole, he wrote. I have the catalyst. He sent all 3. Then he closed the laptop, hocked up the Seiko from the table where he'd set it while he was typing, turned it over in his hands. The cracked glass. The second hand moving in its steady uninterrupted circuit, strapped it on his wrist, stood up, went to bed, and slept. Not easily, not without the particular weight of everything that was waiting, but through. All the way through to morning, which was, for tonight, exactly enough. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and recycled air, and the particular tension of a room where people had been waiting a long time for something that mattered. Marcus sat at the witness table, dark suit, his father's Seiko on his left wrist, hands flat on the polished wood, not performing calm, just still in the way of a man who has decided what he is going to say and is ready to say it. Voss and Pruitt sat at the defense table, in suits that fit their bodies but no longer fit what they were. Something had gone out of both of them. Not collapsed, just reduced. The specific reduction of men who had operated for 15 years under the assumption that certain consequences didn't apply to them, and were now sitting in a room where that assumption was being formally corrected. Voss stared at the table. Pruitt looked at Marcus. Steady, until Pruitt looked away. Kathleen Marsh. Prosecution gray hair cut close, the kind of competence that doesn't announce itself. Walked to the center of the room. The state calls Marcus Cole. He testified in the voice he used for operational debriefs. Clear, sequential, without editorializing. I let the facts carry the weight because the facts were heavy enough, Rex. The walk. The cruiser slowing alongside him at a pace that wasn't routine. The questions that were never really questions. And then Rex, lowering himself to the ground in response to Marcus's command, complying, and Pruitt firing anyway. He was following a direct instruction, Marcus said. He was in the process of obeying when Officer Pruitt fired. The room was very quiet. Then Marsh turned to the screen beside the jury box. Exhibit 14. The footage from Marcus's living room cameras. No narration. No music. Just Voss and Pruitt moving through the space with the ease of men who had done this kind of thing before. And then Voss's face close to the lens. His voice picked up clean by the microphone under the coffee table. Just like your old man. Didn't know when to stay down. The room went cold. Marcus watched the jury. Watched 12 people arrive at the same understanding simultaneously. Watches Voss' lawyer. The urgency of a man trying to find the one piece of debris that might float. The defense attorney tried 3 angles on cross. Suggested Marcus's military background had colored his perception. Implied Rex's movement had been ambiguous. Framed Marcus's composure as rehearsed. You're a trained operative, Fitch said. Doesn't that make your read of situation particular? It's most accurate, Marcus said. I was trained to assess threat correctly. What I assessed on April 9th was two officers escalating a situation they had manufactured. The footage confirms it. Fitch sat down. The second day, Simone played the recording of Doyle's phone call. She did it without theater. Pressed the button, and Doyle's voice filled the courtroom. Smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man accustomed to being the adult in difficult rooms, deployed now in service of his own protection. I think we can resolve this in a way that works for everyone. Voss and Pruitt acted outside acceptable parameters. What I need in return is for my name to stay out of the coal file. I have enough influence to make the rest of this clean. Marcus didn't look at the jury during the playback. He looked at Warren Doyle. Doyle was in the gallery, third row, dark jacket, the posture of a man who had come to observe and was now discovering he was the subject. The recording played. Marcus watched the 10 seconds it took Doyle to understand what he was hearing. Watched the composure hold for 8 of those seconds and then, in the 9th, developed the fracture of a man realizing that the move he'd made in confidence was the move that finished him. Doyle looked at Marcus. Marcus held his gaze, not with triumph, with the specific quality of a man who has waited a long time for a specific moment and has now arrived at it. 3 seconds. Then Marcus looked away, because Doyle didn't deserve more than 3 seconds. Voss found Marcus on a Wednesday morning outside a coffee shop on Mercer Street. Not on the courthouse steps, just a sidewalk. 2 people on the same block, except nothing about it was ordinary. Marcus saw him coming from half a block away, stopped when Voss reached him, let the moment be what it was. Voss looked diminished in a way that had nothing to do with anything physical. The suit was the same quality, the shoulders the same width. But the thing that had made him take up more space than he deserved, the certainty that the world arranged itself around men like him, that was gone. You could have just reported it, Voss said. The performance was gone from his voice. What was underneath was something close to honest. Gone to the press, filed with the AG. Why all of this? Marcus looked at him. Because I did that, he said. 11 years ago, when my father died, Simone filed. We reported. We used the system. A pause. And your name went into a drawer with Warren Doyle's signature on the closure document and stayed there. Voss said nothing. I didn't change the approach because I stopped believing in the system, Marcus said. I changed it because I understood what the system needed. Evidence it couldn't ignore. Evidence that didn't go through the channels Doyle had spent 26 years managing. He looked at Voss steadily. So I made sure it got there a different way. Voss exhaled. Long, the exhale of a man setting something down that he'd been carrying without admitting it. I didn't know what was going to happen, Voss said. October 2013. I didn't. You didn't act, Marcus said. For 4 minutes and 17 seconds you stood there and didn't act. That's not a plan. That's a choice. And you spent 11 years making it again every time you signed your name to something that kept it buried. He picked up his coffee. See you in court, he said, and walked away. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks after the verdict. A guilty on all counts for Voss and Pruitt. The jury had taken 11 hours. Simone had called at 4:17 in the afternoon. All of it, Marcus. 3 words. Enough. The hearing added Doyle, conspiracy, obstruction, and negligent homicide for the 4 minutes and 17 seconds on October 14, 2013. Kathleen Marsh had built that last charge carefully, patiently, from Nadia's footage and documentation, and the testimony of 2 former department employees who came forward after the recording became public. Judge Pemberton spoke for 12 minutes before the sentence. He spoke about pattern, about systemic protection, about the difference between an officer who makes a wrong decision under pressure and a man who makes a series of decisions over years that collectively constitute a sustained abdication of everything the uniform represents. I spoke about James Cole, said the name clearly, into the record, into the room, said it the way it deserved to be said, as the name of a man, not a case number, not an incident file. A man who had worked and walked home after late shifts through a neighborhood that was his, and had the right to expect to be treated accordingly. Marcus sat in the front row. Simone Bassand over his. Derek Voss, Shane Pruitt. 25 years. Federal prison. Oh, parole. The room made a sound, not a cheer. The sound of people who had been holding something for a long time and were now carefully letting it go. Warren Doyle. 20 years. Simone pressed her hand harder over his. He turned his palm over, held hers. After a while she said quietly, "Dad would have liked this." "He would have said it took too long," Marcus said. Simone made a sound that was laughing and not laughing at the same time. "He would have said exactly that." Late April afternoon, the sideways light, the oaks throwing long shadows across the path. Marcus walked alone. He stopped at his father's stone first, James Cole, 1958-2013. The crack in the lower left corner. The grass neat around the base. "Doyle got 20 years, Marcus said. Voss and Pruitt got 25. Your name is in the record now, the right way. Not as an incident, as a man." The wind moved through the oaks. "I know you'd say 3 men going to prison doesn't fix the larger thing. You'd be right." He looked at the stone. "But it's a start, and I'm going to keep going. Not because it's finished. Because you taught me that keeping going is the whole job." He stood there a little longer, then walked to Rex. X, 2018-2024. Loyal to the end. Marcus sat down on the grass beside it, not standing over it. Beside it, the way you sit with someone you know well enough that formality would be an insult. "Hey boy." The afternoon continued around him, unhurried, indifferent in the way of afternoons. "They're in," he said. "All 3. You'd have wanted to know that." He looked at the stone. "I keep reaching for you in the morning. That half second before I'm fully awake when the house still feels like it has you in it. And then it doesn't." A pause. "I don't think that goes away. I'm not sure I want it to. The reaching means you were real." He reached into his jacket pocket. The photograph, Rex is in the backyard, 2 years ago. Ears up, mouth open in the specific happiness of a dog who is exactly where he wants to be. Marcus pressed it against the base of the stone. Stood up. His phone rang, unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Director Harmon's office. The Office of Personnel Standards, Department of Defense. We're building a reform program. Standards for conduct in civilian law enforcement partnerships. Oversight protocols, training benchmarks. Your name was submitted as a potential consultant by someone who asked to remain anonymous, but said you would understand why." Marcus looked at Rex's stone, at the photograph pressed against the base. Nadia Reeves, he was certain. The 2 years of documentation. The patient architecture of everything she'd built. She had understood from the beginning that what Marcus had was not just a personal story, but a lever. Something that could move things larger than one case, larger than 3 convictions. She'd been right. "Who do I call to get started?" he said. He drove home the long way, past the corner of Delmer and 5th. The dry cleaning establishment was a cell phone repair shop now. The streetlight had a new fixture. The sidewalk had been repaved. You couldn't tell anything had happened there, from looking at it. That was the thing about sidewalks. They held what happened and then let it go. Let new feet walk on them every day, until the ordinary weight of continuing life was heavier than the single heavy thing that had happened once. Marcus looked at the corner as he drove past, kept driving. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. Garage door paint peeling in 3 places. Gutter still sagging over the kitchen window. Porch railing on the left still loose. Tomorrow he'd buy the paint. The railing this weekend. The gutter he'd find someone good for. Inside, the house was quiet. The quiet he had been learning to live inside. Not absence exactly, not anymore, but presence. What Rex had left behind, which was more than absence. The walks. The rhythm. The daily proof that showing up for small things was how you showed up for everything. Hung his jacket on the hook by the door. Stopped, reached into the pocket, took out Rex's leash, held it for a moment. The brown leather worn smooth at the grip, shaped by 4 years of his hand closing around it every morning. Then hung it back on the hook, where it belonged. He went to the kitchen, put the coffee on, stood at the window while it brewed and watched the last light leave the sky the way it always left. Gradually, and then completely, the dark coming in with its particular quality of rest. Sat down at his father's table, and noticed, sitting there, coffee warm in his hands, clock on the wall marking the same seconds it had always marked, that he was not running from something, not running towards something, not managing the weight of what came before, or planning the next move. He was just sitting at a table as he saw the kitchen at the end of a long day. Present, here, still. His father had sat at this same table for 30 years. Had known in the practical, unheroic way of a man who worked and paid his bills and walked home after late shifts. That showing up was the whole thing. But the daily ordinary act of existing with integrity was not a small thing, not a lesser thing, was in fact the thing that everything else was built on. Marcus had spent 14 years doing extraordinary things, and he had come home to his father's ordinary, which turned out to be enough, which turned out in the end to be everything. He drank his coffee. The clock marked the seconds. The leash hung on the hook by the door, and Marcus Cole sat in the quiet of his father's kitchen and understood. In the way you understand things that have been true for a long time and are only now fully visible, that getting up was not the end of the story. It was just what you did every day. You just got back up.